Hello and welcome to this Conversations on Groong episode. First off, as always, thanks to our listeners for your valuable and often insightful comments. Keep them coming and like and share our shows to your friends. But we have another request today. Hundreds of you listen to our shows through their podcast apps. If you listen to our show on Apple Podcasts, for example, on your iPhone or iPad or your Mac computers, please consider rating our show and leave a brief review. We have 18 reviews, I think, right, Hovig?
It's been stuck at 18 for a while, so please help us get more.
Yes, that will help us become more visible. And, we're always interested in reaching a wider audience. Okay, so today we are talking about the upcoming 2024 parliamentary elections in Georgia. These elections are set to take place on October 26. That's in just 3 days. The country is at a crossroads, caught between its modern efforts to join Europe and trying to remain grounded in the geopolitical realities of the region. For the political forces taking part, the stakes have never been higher. So we will be diving deep into the dynamics of the election campaigns, key players, and the broader context of Georgia's growing tensions with its Western partners. To help us unpack all of this, and that is a lot, we have with us Sopo Japaridze, who has been closely following and covering these developments. Welcome back, Sopo. Great to have you back.
Kamo, Sopo, welcome back.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
We are glad to have you. So to set the stage, we should mention that Sopo has been following the 2024 Georgian Parliamentary elections closely through her own ongoing coverage on her Substack. We're putting a link to her very interesting Substack page in our show notes, so please go there and click your way through to her work. In a detailed 6-part series, she and her guests have provided valuable insights into the key issues shaping this election, from political party dynamics to foreign influences and public sentiment. Her series, which starts with an overview of the election landscape and progresses through the campaigning strategies and media narratives, is an excellent resource for us, certainly, but for anyone looking to understand what's at stake for Georgia. Again, you can check her work on substack.com/@Sopio, S-O-P-I-O, starting with her comprehensive election guide in episode 1.
Thank you so much for that wonderful advertising.
And I should say that in our previous episodes as well on Groong, we've explored many of these themes, including Georgia's complex relationship with the West, the role of Georgia, and the evolving domestic politics. You can find those on our website, podcasts.groong.org, under the section content and then categories and then Georgia. So you can look at all our previous episodes on Georgia. And today we're continuing that conversation, but with a focus on the elections. So Sopo, can you start by giving us a high-level summary of where things stand today, 3 days before the election day?
So actually it's a little bit more, or calmer than I expected. There was on Sunday, the opposition march, like pro-Europe march. And then yesterday was the Georgian Dream ruling party march. And they both had pretty huge crowds. I do think, based on video, and I could be wrong, that the Georgian Dream had a larger crowd. And so they're both sort of showing their strength and, trying to get their people out. And I think, again, the different polling that shows Georgian Dream is in the lead in every single poll, both, Georgian Dream polls and also opposition and foreigners who've done polls. There's differences in how the percentages. So, but polling, as I understand, as everyone has said, it's not very, it doesn't really reflect what's going to happen on the elections. So it could be very much skewed. Georgian Dream could get way more than they're showing right now in some of the Edison polls and so on, or way less. We don't know.
I was actually reflecting on that because it seems none of these pollsters were able to clearly predict the previous election results. But, since you mentioned the polls, can I just take a moment and summarize them? We have it in our show notes, but there are 3 major pollsters: Edison Research, Gorby, and Savanta. Gorby is the most pro-Georgian Dream one, with giving 60.2% to Georgian Dream, and 15.4% to Unity, which includes UNM, and then less than 10% for each for the remaining ones. Meanwhile, on the other side of the spectrum would be Edison Research, which is 34% for Georgian Dream, 18% for Unity, and then a higher percentage for the smaller coalitions like for Georgia, Coalition for Change, etc. So we'll put the details in the show notes, but what's your take on the pollsters specifically? Are they providing any valuable insights into the political sentiment? Even if at a point in time they are skewed or they are biased, how have they changed over time, in your opinion?
Yeah, I don't know enough about polling to have like a very conclusive kind of commentary on it, but I do think at least they show that Georgian Dream is still way ahead in every single poll. It shows that. So I think that it's amazing to me that the narratives from a lot of the Western press and the opposition like doesn't really acknowledge that to that degree. Like they keep saying almost like the whole country wants Europe and Georgian Dream is against the people. It's like these kinds of narratives around it.
Yeah.
But the polls show something very different. And I think the role of the polls is really to then dispute the election results, right? So like supposedly to prevent rigging the elections. No one has tired of saying in the opposition that Georgian Dream is going to rig the elections. Like they have continuously said this, that there will be some rigging. And then yesterday I was watching this panel in Columbia University, which had two Georgians and two like foreigners who were discussing Georgian politics. And then it was like, well, there's structural rigging, So it was like they're trying to come up with all kinds of ways to explain the election results that will happen afterwards. And so I think one of the main things that's happening is that the Georgian Dream wants a constitutional majority. Like they need to win over 60% to be able to change the constitution and to have all like more power to change things. And so I think the fight is going to be around that, So definitely Georgian Dream is going to win, but by how much are they going to win? That's going to be the point of contention. And they're also trying to say that they're forcing people or buying people off to get them to vote. Yesterday for the protests, everyone was writing like on Twitter, and I was seeing like all the my Facebook bubble, which is like all liberals. I see what they write, and it's like, oh, they're dragging people there. Nobody wants to go there. They're paying them off. Oh, all of a sudden traffic is a problem. The opposition shuts down main streets all the time. Like all the time, there's protests. Never a problem about traffic then, but all of a sudden traffic has become a real problem. They're saying, oh, they have turned these, like there's like a plaza into a parking lot. Like where were all the buses supposed to stop anyway? So any way they can to try to discredit it. It looks really petty almost. They could be like, they could take like a higher, like a better kind of take. But this, I guess the pettiness kind of works. In every possible way, they're trying to say, and then Solomon Zurabishvili, the president, also said the same thing when she spoke at the Europe rally. She said, we are here free for our own will to be here at this protest, unlike the other protests the government does, so much, sort of immunizing people from thinking that Georgian Dream's protest actually is a legitimate force about elections. So the polls are kind of playing in that kind of, space, because the Gorby polls are showing 60%, I think, for Georgian Dream. And this is they're like, oh, this is delusional, is what like all saying. And they would like to stick with the lower number, of course, the 34% or whatever. So there's definitely, it's a huge difference though. When you have one polling showing 30% and then you're showing one that says 60%, that is not a very good system. So I don't know how much that works here. I think at the end of the day, what's most important of the elections is going to be if the U.S. embassy okays it, because that's
Right.
the real power here, right? So if the U.S. embassy says, yes, we accept the results of the election, if Georgian Dream wins, that will alleviate a lot of the tension and fear of revolutionary situation or so
Right.
on. But if they don't, that will be a huge, huge problem, I think.
You mentioned turnout a little bit. Speaking of that, do you expect a high voter turnout? And for which side would the high voter turnout be beneficial?
I don't know exactly what the turnout usually is, but usually it's a pretty high turnout. I think they kept saying, like our last show, Georgi was saying how they keep saying we got to get the youth vote out and youth don't vote, but in reality, youth vote here much more than any other place since they've always had a high turnout. So I think the opposition is counting on two forces to win. One is diaspora, and the other is youth vote. So every conversation they mention those two things, and I've seen tons of get out the youth vote for the youth, and also a lot of emphasis. All of a sudden, people remember the immigrants, like no one cares the entire time, but now all of a sudden they are the future of tomorrow because they're expecting that because they live in EU countries or US, they're going to be more pro EU, and they're going to vote for opposition. But when I was in Italy, I would like to say that they also had divisions there as well, between sort of pro opposition and pro government. And I actually think most of the low paid workers will not be able to take that day off to even vote because I know that they can't even get those dates off who live in like with the pensioners and they take care of elderly. They usually can't even go to the dentist or doctor if it's not the exact day that they have time off. So I don't even know how many are going to vote that has the worst sort of economic conditions in the diaspora. So of course it's going to be mostly the people who have more privilege to go to the polling stations who are going to be probably more pro opposition. I'm assuming. I don't know for sure. Because I think in the US, a lot of Georgians are actually very conservative. They're pro US, but they also like this whole conservative politics as well. So I think it's going to be a high voter turnout. I think Georgian Dream, again, I'm assuming that they are working on their turnout pretty well. They do have certain advantages, of course, because they're in the government. They control most of the apparatus, and they have connections. They know people, so it's a lot easier in that sense to mobilize people for your side. The opposition doesn't have that. I'm so sorry, my cat is going crazy. So I don't know.
What's your cat's name?
She's named after Armenian Bolshevik, Kamo. So,
Well, he's obviously a political cat.
yeah, she has like a red collar. Yeah.
Right.
So we'll see how that works. But I think in general, the opposition hasn't. What I have again, I haven't been following. I haven't been going to the regions, but from reading some of my friends and other journalists writing that the opposition is not really campaigning in the regions. I think they may have just like given that up because it's a lot of resources, and they also Georgian Dream has such a stronger foothold there. Then I think that it's mostly they're counting on the urban elite, middle class type vote, the diaspora and the youth. They do control the universities though. Like it's the opposition, these pro-Europe people, they have a lot of reach over students, over youth. They really do. Like I have a friend of mine who goes to university, and you should see the things that the professor tells him. I mean, they're like, well, we might not even teach social policies anymore in this class because if Georgian Dream wins without the EU, there will never be any social policy. So I'm not going to even teach that. So let's just wait till October 26th if I'm going to continue teaching you this. And these are the things they say to them, and then they consider that not rigging the elections, right? They consider that like normal, but somehow if you are like provide a bus, that's rigging the elections. So it's a very, again, very biased, totally different world. Nobody listens to each other. No one actually takes each other's arguments seriously or consider, good faith attempts. So, I mean, it's similar to everywhere else, actually.
Yeah, in fact, just a few days ago, we published a show with Nino Skvartsova about bias in academia, and we talked a lot about this very pro-EU bias in academia, which was interesting. So I am, obviously we are very far from Georgian politics, but we only talked about the two major parties, which was GD, Georgian Dream, the incumbent, and Unity Alliance, which includes UNM, Saakashvili's party. There are a few others, and depending on the poll you look at, they have significant number of, percentage. Like sometimes in the Edison Research poll, for instance, the three other ones, the three runners up for Georgia, Coalition for Change, and Strong Georgia, all have like more than 10%. So that, to me, if that poll is true, that to me increases the likelihood of some kind of a coalition that would potentially change, have have the ability to change power if those other smaller alliances decide to form a coalition. So we don't want to go too much in detail because I think that would be great for people to listen to your podcasts about that. But which of these other alliances has the potential to form coalitions with each other and sway the results of these elections, in your opinion? Do you have, can you give us like a very high level, description or, overview?
Yeah, there have been multiple coalitions that have formed. One is like former UNM and libertarian types that have formed a coalition. Then there's one that's like led by the banker Japaridze. He was TBC Bank is like one of the bigger banks here, biggest besides Bank of Georgia. He's known for throwing people out of their homes. Actually, people really hate him, so I'm really confused why he even is in politics. And he allied with all these sort of other independent type of party people that had like one-man shows, and they didn't really have that much leverage, but people like them. Then there is the former UNM, Guaramia, and so on, Achari coalition. And then there's former GD Gacharia. Doesn't have a coalition. He's running without a coalition. So I think for people who are dissatisfied with GD will vote for the ones who like want, I call Gacharia like Georgian Dream 2018, so who want that Georgian Dream back, they'll vote for him. People who never liked GD will vote for Achali, like the coalition that has more UNM type of people in it, who have been the most aggressive anti-Russian, I would say. Elena Khoshtaria was the one that, with Gavrilov, when this Russian MP sat in this Orthodox gathering in the speaker's chair, she was the one leading the charge and making everyone kind of agitating everybody to go out. And apparently we were conquered by Russia by this one Orthodox Christian church meeting. So she's incredibly activist type of anti-Russian person. So I think that a lot of people would vote for them who are maybe dissatisfied with UNM, but want to keep within that family. And then some of my family members actually are voting for TBC Bank guy, because they actually like banks. Talking to some, they identify with the problems of the banker, of people who don't pay their loans or some things like that. So and I think also because he has done this sort of art washing, where he like TBC Bank would constantly fund art projects and try to get a foothold in the art scene. So that's like some of the, I would say, some of the supporters. In general, though, no one in the opposition is someone that people like. Nobody likes the opposition, though. Like it's like they some of them will just bite the bullet and like vote for someone because they hate Georgian Dream. Like people also don't like Georgian Dream, and they have a lot of problems with it, but they don't hate them as much as the people hate opposition. Like the hatred there, I think, is very, very strong. And also just no one has offered anything that has been interesting for most. Besides that, there's also Girchi, which is another libertarian party. And then there is conservatives like Patriot Alliance and conservative coalition type.
So besides, is there any other major alliance that would support Georgian Dream's current position in terms of the stance on West versus Russia? That's essentially we'll talk more about it, but essentially this election is devolving into that one major issue. So that's what I want to know, what surprises, if all of the alliances united together, and if Georgian Dream received, let's say, less than 50%, is there a likelihood that all of them could unite together to change the power in Georgia?
So I think not. This is how Salome Zurabishvili, the president, has tried to deal with this problem. So she has something called the Georgian Charter. She made the opposition parties, coalitions, 4 coalitions, signed it. And it said that there will be a technical government and this is something she made up, okay? So just like follow like the logic here. It doesn't quite make sense to me, but so a technical government that will have these coalitions that will be adhering to the charter, supposedly stay in power for about a year, because it'll take a year to implement and then get rid of all the Russian laws, suppose, the alleged Russian laws that Georgian Dream has enacted. And then once they fulfill all the EU directives and their desires, then they will dissolve themselves and have open, free, and fair elections, because she keeps insisting that this is not a free and fair election. Now, she, who's somebody who's not running for anything, who's not on any party list, she maintains power over all the 4 coalitions through this charter. She said, when you vote for these coalitions, any of the ones I said, it's a vote for me. So also a problem there, because again, she's not on any party list. She's not running for, why is she controlling this 4, coalitions? And so she wanted, but she didn't get her way. She wanted to create the skeleton of the technical government, like have everyone already appointed before the elections. So the 2 weeks that you're supposed to form a government and so on, she knew that they hate each other so much they would just be bitterly struggling, and then Georgian Dream would capitalize on this. This is, of course, in the case that they win, the opposition. So she knew that this is what's going to happen. So she wanted to have a government in place after, when they win, that they would already be like, okay, well, we present you this government, and they could start ruling. And then she wants to appoint the prime minister, and she decided to find someone that was so-called non-political to head this. None of it makes sense, because it's a crazy thing technical government's a crazy thing. First of all, it'll take them more than a year to do all those things. People don't know who's going to get more votes. So the parties did not agree to having the government formed before the elections, because I believe they want to see their chances of who's going to win more, so they can have more leverage. So she seems very upset about this. Like, I saw the interview 2 days ago. But she already has the government in her head, and then once the election happens, she will then, I guess, negotiate. But she says that she has the last word on it. This is how they're attempting to create some kind of unity within the opposition to be able to overwhelm Georgian Dream. Now, will this happen? Knowing the opposition and how no one actually cares about the government or about the people of Georgia, they care about their own petty issues, I highly doubt they could do it. I think they're just going to bicker. They're not going to be able to, divide their resources, and it's going to be a horrible fest. So the worst thing that could happen is the opposition wins. But in some ways, maybe people could see that they are horrible leaders and they can't govern. But it's a tough lesson. You don't want to go through all that pain and throw everything away just so people can learn that, look, these people are frauds. And so the biggest thing has been, like even Salome and everyone else has been saying, so it's not about, okay, they're like, well, maybe you don't like the coalitions. Maybe you don't like the opposition. That's fine. But we should vote for a coalition type multi-party government. So now they're asking people to vote for the form of government, not the content. Because they're like, to be European, you have to have many parties in government ruling. I guess she doesn't know anything about the US, because that doesn't happen. So, yeah. So now they're saying that this is the European path, to have this, supposedly you have all these different parties that learn how to talk to each other and, make concessions and, kumbaya, and that doesn't happen. That's not going to happen. And so that's another element in all of this. And I have no idea how no one goes on television and starts being like, why Salome have this power over these coalitions? Why does she get to decide? She's not on any ballot. No. And she calls this democracy. This makes zero sense to me. Again, no one asks these questions because no one does journalism in Georgia. So
let's go into more details about the themes of this campaign. The key line of the political demarcation in this election, or should we say geopolitical demarcation, is the level of Georgia's commitment to the agenda of EU and NATO. In Western media, the narrative is framed as, if GD wins, then Russia wins. and Georgia will pivot towards Russia. Meanwhile, I think voices grounded in realpolitik have a more nuanced definition that GD's policies simply seek good relations with all its neighbors, or more precisely, avoid enmity and creating any second fronts with major powers, and those major powers that have an interest in Georgia. I think we could count Russia, we could count China, and potentially also Iran. So, all three of them are right now in one way or another considered enemies of the West. So this one issue has overshadowed many other issues and divisions in Georgian society and this campaign. So besides this specific issue, what other key national and social values are on the line during these elections?
Nothing. There's nothing else besides the polarization of LGBT that's now become more of a feature, even though the opposition doesn't say anything against it, because they know that Georgians are a conservative society. So no opposition is willing to risk their necks out to protect the LGBT community, because they know if they say that, then they'll lose even more votes. So it's really just one-sided, where Georgian Dream has politicized, LGBT propaganda as an anti-LGBT propaganda. So even the Europe March, some of the Georgian Dream politicians made comments like, of course, Georgians wouldn't go to their march. It's like a gay pride parade there, So like they have been using it. And that's it. It's like it's about Russia. It's about Europe, and it's about LGBT. And none of this.
But Sopo, when we say that one issue, for example, just LGBT, if you look at the broader context, is it more of a liberal versus conservative values? Because earlier this year, we also saw attacks on the Georgian Orthodox Church, and there wasn't a lot of resonance in Western media about that or anything.
Yeah, actually, which side does the Georgian Orthodox Church support? That would be interesting to know as well.
I mean, they recently released a statement. I guess the opposition was trying to get them to make a statement or something. And they said, like, we are not going to interfere in these elections, but we'll remind you that we want peace and we want, stability. And like some of the things they said was definitely pro-GB, but without directly intervening. I think it's correct. They shouldn't directly intervene. I think they should just say, like, this is, and it's of course their values. So they, first of all, Western media also did not talk about how Georgian Dream destroyed the conservative, like the Alt-Info party, and jailed some of them and destroyed their party. This, of course, is not part of liberal values. As long as you get rid of parties that are against the Western liberal, values, it doesn't matter. Only if you touch pro-Western liberal, and liberal, I mean loosely, because they're, ethno-nationalist, kind of xenophobic types. So as long as you don't touch their people, you're liberal democracy. Also, but if you touch their people, then it becomes democracy backsliding, right? I mean, I wrote an article recently, and I'm just like, why is it that the EU in the West stops the EU accession based on two niche laws, right? NGO law that impacts very small amount of people, and LGBT law, which also impacts a very small amount of people. They don't stop accession over not having minimum wage or living wage, unemployment insurance, nothing to do with things that would actually impact most people and improve their lives, right? So clearly, it's only the laws that they consider that are part of now the sort of geopolitical Western package that they have, violated. And we know that LGBT is a point that has become part of sort of Western empire. Like they want these laws a specific way, and I think it's a way to make it a wedge issue everywhere, And so those things are going to get more airtime than anything else. Those things are going to become more important in saying that this is why. I actually think they don't care that much about LGBT law. I think it was the NGO law that really made them angry because it's about transparency on Western funding, you know?
Yes.
But they will, of course, politicize. And it's unfortunate that that gay people are being politicized in Georgia, you know, against the Georgian society and also the government. You know, I think that's actually a very unfortunate thing that is happening. So, and of course, no one on the opposition is coming to their defense either. So it's just empty promises. What was a trans woman that was beaten 2 days ago, hit in the head with a rock, turned out to be the opposition party, one of the party people on the list. You know, so we know that transphobia and homophobia is very, very common. But they keep trying to blame this on Georgian Dream, which is just not true. They did politicize it to some level, but only because it was already there, you know? And so listening to BTN Ivanishvili's interview, and he did an interview on Sunday, or sorry, maybe Monday. And I see someone, to be very generous, I see someone who's earnestly engaging with sort of conservative politics that's very much coming from the US, because a lot of the examples he used are mostly US, like conservative talking points. He read this book, he showed us like 2150, that apparently, you know, this is sort of like anti-liberal book about the future. It's like a dystopian novel. He was like, he's like, I did the anti-discrimination law. Like, he's like, I passed that in Parliament. People were against it. So he's like, in every way, there's, you know, discrimination is like anti-discrimination is protected in Georgia. But it's about the propaganda that's a problem. And then he cites all these sort of examples that a lot of, you know, Americans also use. Most of those examples are very irrelevant to Georgia because we don't really have any of that. That you don't have the schools, you know, you don't have all this, like, you know, very vibrant sort of LGBT community that's in the US that has all these other elements to it, or Europe. But I think he believes that if you start allowing like gay pride, that this is a Pandora's box. You will open through all these other things like gender, you know, like gender politics will become very strong. And then this will be like whole or cultural wars around it that will lead to more and more polarization. So I think he's thinking of it as we need to just sort of stop this now before it becomes out of hand like it is in the US. And he genuinely believes it. I mean, he read, you know, the way he interacted with it makes sense. Like, that's how he thinks. And I think a lot of conservative politicians also think that. Again, I don't think he's like a homophobe. I think he's just someone, and he's like, he was really like trying to be like, say the correct, like LGBT. He's an older man here. He's really trying to like make sense of it, you know, but it's like, it's a different generation, different kind of seeing. So I can see how a lot of young people would be like, upset about this. You know, of course, it feels like, because a lot of Georgians do believe that any kind of LGBT activism is propaganda. Like, it's just like 2021 studies show this. So again, like some of our, you know, workers, you know, have discussions with them, and most of them support this law. You know, they believe that. They also don't believe that they're homophobic. They say, like, I don't care if you're gay, just I just don't want this in the streets, you know? And so they very much support the propaganda, like anti-propaganda laws. Then they're saying that to be pro-Western is to be, you know, pro-gay is a lot of the understanding. Also, to be Western means that in every possible way you have to do whatever the EU tells you. So in the US, so if US says anything, and it doesn't matter who it is, right? Because they can't differentiate between different forces in the West as well, because it's not, you know, and I know because, you know, I grew up in the US, you were in the US, that US is not a politically, you know, a homogenous place. There's differences right now being played out on different sides and so on. But still, so there's this idea that the West, whatever any politician says, whatever any kind of directive, we should just accept it, no matter what. And Georgian Dream is saying, actually, I think we need to, and I think conservative politics comes in handy at a time when you're trying to build a country, right? You have to create some kind of unitary, some kind of a common understanding of what is Georgia. And so he's saying, oh, we are the descendants of Vaja, we're descendants of Ilya, we're descendants of these great men. We have survived empires, I'm sure you in Armenia, similar kind of thing, that we are people who have one of the longest histories in the world. And we should be proud of our heritage, our ancestors. We should respect the church because that has given us the power of sort of unites us. And it gives us, and I think it's important because when you have an onslaught of capitalism, something to ground you, right? I think like in general, Christianity, religion, those things become important when you are exposed to all this sort of global forces and you are, exposed to all the social media, everything's happening. All of a sudden you go from having zero access to everything at once. You need like an anchor in the world. So he's pushing for this more conservative, how to get these people together in this, in this country, create a national identity, Liberals are like, we don't need a national identity. Our national identity is that we're European. We just do whatever the EU says. And we all just embrace every value and they don't have a coherent, comprehensive understanding of what that looks like.
Was it Zurabishvili who said something like, if we get into the EU, we will be the best EU country, and it was like it was like a audition for who can be the best EU country. Just let us get into the EU, and you'll see what we can do.
It was like American Idol, like just give me a chance, you'll see.
Yeah.
Hovig, let's just take a moment here. We'd like to remind everyone to go to our donate page, podcasts.groong.org/donate, and consider buying us a coffee or two, or better yet, become a sustaining member of Groong and give monthly.
We like to believe that we are unique in the category of Armenian podcasts. We digest Armenian news weekly and bring you interesting discussions relevant to it. We've always been a labor of love, and we're not only nonprofit, but we're also non-budget. Just 2 to 3 friends who have committed our lives, time, and effort to understand the world around Armenians and sharing that understanding with you.
Of course, we will continue our work as we always have, but we are stronger with you than without you. Your support will help us expand our reach to more people who are interested in Armenian news and affairs around the world.
So please visit our donate page, podcasts.groong.org/donate, and consider supporting us. Thank you in advance. We appreciate your listening to us and take that trust and your support very seriously.
Thank you.
I do want to go forward because you mentioned the Ivanishvili interview. And during that interview, there was a bombshell revelation where he claimed that a Western official had suggested that Georgia open a second front against Russia in this current war in Ukraine. Can you give us details of what happened, how this happened, and the significance of this, maybe among the public? And is it a major thing being discussed among the public?
Yeah. So just to go back to the point where I thought that was really interesting, 2 different versions of being pro-European is that Salome did say, like, you'll just let us in, you'll see, we'll be the best allies, we'll be the best, girl in the world. You just let us in. And she spoke at the rally saying this. Well, the next day, Yedina said, I don't want to enter the EU like Moldova and like Ukraine. Like they're like, with all due respect, and I'm a friend of Ukraine. I don't want that kind of Europe to enter on the expense of your entire country being, annihilated. So he said, I would like to go into Europe with our head, held high. And so just based on the 2 different messages, like what would be for you most attractive? Like for me, based on just that, I would definitely want to, I'm very proud and I don't want to grovel. I will never grovel at anyone's feet, like that's offensive to me. And so just based on that, like I think that the messaging from Georgia Dream is much better on that sense, because it says with dignity to Europe instead of we'll do whatever you want. On the second point, so the second front thing is a really big problem where, Georgian Dream has been saying that they want us to open a second front. They've been laughing at them. The Western politicians have been saying this. They're making stuff up. The opposition is saying they're lying. Then Georgian Dream started using this like descriptive theory about global war party. They've laughed at that as a conspiracy theorist nut. From what I understand, if we take Bizina's account, which he says that the prime minister was approached by a high-ranking official from another country, we don't know which country, he was told to start a second front and we would last for 3 to 4 days on the second front. And then we can continue our struggle guerrilla style in mountains and they will support us, right? So I can actually see someone saying this because I do think they're desperate. And again, if you look at U.S. foreign policy, if you look at NATO, because Putin keeps saying they don't want NATO soldiers to die, because if NATO soldiers die, it becomes a huge domestic problem, right?
Yeah.
But if Georgians die, Ukrainians die, it's not a problem. They've been very clear that until the last Ukrainian, they're willing to keep fighting. So I'm sure they would also fight till the last Georgian. And and I think as Georgians, we should say no to that, and so knowing US, knowing NATO, knowing all this, I personally believe that it's probably what happened. However, when you have most of the population in Georgia, like the sort of opposition population who just thinks the US and the West is a benevolent force, will do all kinds of great things for us, of course they're going to deny any of this. And they also don't believe that a deep state or military industrial complex exists. They just don't believe it exists. Like they don't believe in any of this stuff that there may be interests in keeping wars going longer, right? They just don't believe it.
Mm-hmm.
They don't study, U.S. Politics. They're not part of it. So,
and just to add to this, in 2019 there was a Rand Corporation report on how the West. It was titled "Extending Russia." There were like 6 or 7 bullet points of, it said, arm Ukraine. And one of those bullet points was to essentially use the conflict in Karabakh, which would extend Russia militarily and exploit that conflict. So it's not far-fetched to believe that there are multiple tools in the West's toolbox for better or worse. And we know, at least for Armenia, we know that for the West, Armenia is essentially just a tool in the toolbox against Russia. And I don't see why Georgia would be any different. So definitely the motive is there, and we just need to take that into account.
It's not far-fetched at all. Like, I think everyone who approaches things in good faith could see that it's not far-fetched. But it's like EU is like a religion to them. Okay, so they cannot understand. They have, replaced religion with the obsession with EU and West. And of course, they're not going to believe it. They just don't believe that they would do anything bad. It's like, they can see what's happening for Israel, like, Palestine, they can see all these things, but they don't believe that the West really is involved in that.
So we've been talking about media coverage, and we talked about how Western media supports the opposition. We've talked about these LGBTQ rights, etc. The media on the other side, supporting the incumbent GD, Georgian Dream, talks about apartment laws, confederation with Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and so on. What's your take on the talk about Georgian confederation with Abkhazia and South Ossetia coming from Russia and that side of the media? Do you think these are red herring issues dangled to tilt the Georgian elections towards Russia?
Oh, it's a really good question. I was feeling more confident about it until I spoke with other people and they were like, this is a far-fetched issue. It's not going to happen. But it's difficult because I do think because of, Armenia, Azerbaijan, like there's all these like interests now to settle by all means, by all means, the conflicts, the territorial conflicts. So I couldn't imagine what happened in Armenia like a few years back. So I don't know what will happen. I do think there is a time when, because of this sort of bipolar world, this sort of multipolar world that's coming up, it's the Western, is now giving Georgia some options to be able to get some of the things that they want by getting these people sort of against each other, like shopping around, let's say.
Yeah.
And of course, we're Georgia. We've always tried to use different empires against each other to get things, right? It's like how you survive.
Would the term for this be pole shopping?
Pole shopping. Well, as we've talked to some of our Georgian colleagues, none of them really believe that either Abkhazians or South Ossetians are ready to confederate with Georgia. They say they absolutely don't trust Georgia as far as a union goes right now, at least for the time being.
But Asbet, one key difference though is unlike Armenians and Azerbaijanis, who have, Armenians have this deep-seated fear and not just and just fear, but historical memory about what happened to them, and not just 1915, but Sumgait and so forth. I think the level of hatred and animosity between Armenians and Azerbaijanis is not comparable to Georgians, Ossetians, and Abkhazians. So
I completely agree with you. Yeah.
That's the only, I think, difference. And maybe even if it creates a possibility that 30, 40 years from now, like in one generation, maybe the future generations might actually look towards coming closer together. Whereas I never see that possibility unfortunately, for Armenia.
Well, that is true. I mean, we have a genocide in our history to account for. The Georgians and Georgian experts have told us do not have that experience to consider in their relations. But on the other hand, Hovig, if you take us 25 to 40 years forward, you are going to have a couple of generations of Abkhazians and South Ossetians who have never been Georgians in their lives. So it would become completely meaningless to talk with them and say, do you want to confederate with this other country, right? The time for that is at a time when maybe all these people exist who knew how it used to be, and they see a point to doing that. But anyway, I just want to know if this is a political carrot that's being dangled in front of Georgia.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the memory of cohabitation is very important. And I do see how the younger people in Osettia, in Abkhazia, in Georgia seem more ethno-nationalist now than ever before. So in the sense that I think it'd be harder for them to understand why even, they grew up with stories like Georgia is now, there are certain people within the Georgians, and Solomon Zurabishvili is now traveling around with this lunatic woman who is showing this video about how Abkhazians committed genocide against us. Well, Russians, Abkhaz, whatever, it's like they try to conflate the two. And so they are trying to, let's say, make the charges more severe to prevent any kind of confederation, I think. So if you have much more, if you have this like, they genocided us, and why would you want to ever be,
together?
Yeah, exactly. And all you have in your heart is like hatred to hopefully like get rid of them, right? Because I think what came out during this thing when BT and I apologized was that a lot of these Georgians were like, oh, it's not just we hate Russia, we also hate Ossetians. It's like, I think this blaming everything on Russia has helped maintain a veneer of liberalism if Georgia, but see, once you take Russia out of the equation, it's very easy to see that there's a lot of ethnic hatred towards Ossetians and Abkhazians. But Russia has been a good cover. That way we can just say, oh, it's Russia's fault and we have nothing to do. We're not against Ossetians, Abkhazians, it's Russia that we're against. But in reality, of course, we know that's just not true for some of these people. And so there was, really this interview with this older man and this younger journalist. And the older man said, we should apologize to Ossetians because I don't think it was right to open fire on them in the middle of the night, And he was like, this is some KGB Russian talking points or whatever. And he was just like, because he kept saying this is an apology to Russia. And the guy's like, no, it's not an apology. Russia should apologize to us, but we definitely need to apologize to Ossetians. Like he was like trying to be very clear that these are not two, Ossetians and Russians are not the same thing. And the guy just kept trying to conflate it. And so it was like this generational divide on that. Like, this attempt that because there's Russia, the Ossetians are separatists, they're pro-Russians. So if you hate everything pro-Russia, supposedly, even including Georgian Dream, they consider Russian, of course you're going to hate even the ethnic group. So it's very, their whole logic and arguments like falls apart very, very, very fast. I don't know if we'll ever be in confederation with them. I do think Russia could force some of these things onto them. I don't think they may not be ready, but I think Russia can force it upon them, right? They have the power. So I don't know if it's going to be, everyone like because we reconciled and love each other, all of a sudden we work together or we cohabitate, have similar governments. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think it's going to be like we're pressuring you, and then Georgian has, it's like will Russia decide that granting this to Georgia will give them more, power, more whatever, more loyal partner than, say, having Abkhazians and Ossetians being their partners so long. So I do think it's going to be like a realpolitik version of what Russia will gain more. I don't know if they'll do it because I think once you take away and you actually fix things in the Caucasus, then you don't have a lot to look. A lot of these problems would disappear. That
you lose your leverage.
Yeah, things. Yeah, exactly. So this, we're such a conflict sort of place in general. It's very difficult.
So speaking of complicated places, I'll take a little diversion here. Moldova held elections over this past weekend, and I read today that the OSCE qualified it as a well-managed and competitive election. And so far, it looks like a fractional minority, or rather, a fractional majority, 50.39% voted to seek membership in the EU. The question is, how does this outcome in Moldova impact Georgia? And also, are there parallels between the Moldovan and Georgian election dynamics?
So I think they have tried now to some of the sort of liberal journalist types, Georgians, to say like it was a big victory in Moldova. They keep trying to claim this is a big victory. We all know this was like actually a failure. But they're like, this is a big victory. And so it gives hope that like Russia now, even Salomon mentioned this, Russia couldn't win in Moldova and they're not going to win in Georgia, like we're defiant. And then this Maya Sandu had to deal with so much pressure from the Russian interference, and yet she's still standing, was the message that was proclaimed by the opposition. I think if you're engaged in good faith, you can see how this was actually quite a defeat. And we still don't know if Maya is going to stay president. So
yeah, there will be a runoff for that one.
Yeah, exactly. We don't really know who's going to win. The thing is, in Moldova, there really is much more pro-Russian elements than there is in Georgia. Georgians don't have organized anything kind of openly Russian. The same things that happen in Moldova will not happen in Georgia. It doesn't happen in Georgia. Georgia has either a completely pro-West, will do whatever you want side, or sort of pragmatic, like not against West, but let's try to get the most we can from different empires competing. So we don't have a pro-Russian side at all. Very minor. Even our church is coordinates within the Orthodox Christian Church is not a pro-Russian either,
Maybe we should call it a pro-Georgian side.
Exactly, right, exactly. So it's a pro-Georgian side. Anyone who is a smart person in my world, anyone who I respect in history, is someone who actually has their own self-interest above others. So if you all of a sudden, the sense I get from the opposition liberals is that they're willing to get rid of their Georgian self-interest for someone else's empire project. That's what I worry about. This is the anti sort of national thinking, So I think that Moldova is not something that's going to have a great impact, but I think it was nice to see for me personally that they're really having a hard time. The EU is having a hard time keeping their people in check. And Moldova was handed candidacy accession on a plate, and they still were like, I don't think we want this. And if Russians were Russian Moldovans, Moldovans in Russia were allowed to vote because they only had 2 polling stations there.
Yeah, we did hear that Moldovans in Western countries were able to vote. Moldovans in Russia, for example, did not have a good opportunity to do that.
Exactly.
Not even Transnistria as well.
So it was the diaspora vote that that even got them over the threshold. So if you actually had more polling stations in Russia, they would have lost. Everyone knows this. And yet they say that it was Russian interference and not the fact that they on purpose did not go give polling and enough ballots in areas they knew were going to be against them. So anyway, this is just
maybe we should read between the lines when it says well managed and competitive.
Exactly, that's what that means. Well managed. So yeah, I don't think it's like that big of a deal here. Most people don't really know about Moldova. I think it's more like the ruling party saw it, the opposition leaders saw it, and they're trying to come up with competing narratives if this was a victory or a failure.
Speaking of what you just said about the diaspora vote, are Georgians in the diaspora allowed to vote in these elections?
Yes, that's what the opposition is counting on.
Okay.
There are about 100,000 men registered, as I understand it.
So Sopo, when we were talking about your cat, how's she doing, by the way?
Just calm down after 60 minutes.
What was her name?
Kamo.
Kamo. Okay. It's funny because when growing up, I guess this was in the height of the Cold War. I was born in Armenia, and I had a puppy named Jimmy. And when I asked, why Jimmy, I think it was one of the adults named it in my family, and my puppy was named after Jimmy Carter. Apparently as an insult against the US. I'm assuming that this part I don't know for sure. But what's funny is probably Jimmy Carter is one of the better presidents in recent US history. So just just thought I'd mention it. I'm not sure if it's worth it. But let's move to close this discussion. What I wanted to ask is almost everyone we've talked to essentially expects unrest and potential violence after elections because they say no matter what happens, the other side is poised to reject the results and take to the streets. You said that a lot depends on how Western institutions and the US Embassy, for instance, will accept these results, which is very, it's not shocking, but it just highlights how much West, this soft power of the West can sway results of the elections. So what do you expect to happen on election day and its aftermath? What potential scenarios do you foresee?
I think everyone's very, very nervous. We're all nervous. Everyone, opposition, government, everybody. Stressful time because we are all afraid of what's going to happen after the day of elections. If it's going to be contested, there will be protests on the street. If it will turn violent, a lot of fear. I don't know what will happen. I'm definitely scared. Bidina said something like, "I'm not afraid of the day after elections. I'm more afraid that there will be something afterwards. As long as the war in Ukraine continues," he said, "we're always under threat for some kind of overthrow or some kind of a situation that would get out of hand." So Salome said, "Oh, don't worry, it'll be peaceful. We don't want anything. I will give security guarantees to Bidina if he loses that that nothing will happen to him just as long as there'll be peace." So everybody keeps saying no one wants this, and that we're doing all these things to keep stability and peace. I think that has been a common fear and a common answer to it. So we'll see. I think that Salome doesn't have things under her control. So I don't know how she can give any guarantees or even, there's just such a lot of power, a lot of different actors, a lot of foreign journalists, a lot of people that are coming from, different parts who really would like to see, and especially because the war in Ukraine is dragging and Ukraine is losing very badly, and Zelensky's peace plan was rejected.
Yeah, I think nowadays the daily casualty rate is 2,000 per day.
Exactly. I don't understand how. I'm.
It's incomprehensible. Absolutely, and depressing.
Absolutely. I really hope this war will stop because I think Ukraine has already lost. There are less than 10 million people have left or died. I don't know. It's something that I think is salient. So I think for most people, they look at Ukraine and it's been used you don't want this future, and so I think once everybody's looking for a quick victory or a quick fix to keep their war going. So I do think losing Georgia again will be very depressing for Ukraine, and they will lose Georgia, definitely. So I think like there's a lot of interest into keeping Georgia a pro-Western sort of proxy kind of state. And so I don't know. I'm very nervous myself. Like like I'm definitely stressed. We'll see.
I'm hoping that saner minds will prevail, and unlike Ukraine, the West will realize that they cannot use small states for their own ambitions, whatever they are. They're not in the interests, in my opinion, of the local people living there.
Absolutely.
This will be probably our last discussion on Groong, at least, before the Georgian elections. So any other parting thoughts?
Well, maybe I should tell you about Kamo, who Kamo was.
Of course.
His real name was Simon Ter-Petrosian. So he took part in the bank robbery, the biggest bank robbery ever in Tbilisi, where...
When was this?
This is, I think, I want to say 1904, something around that. And so he was a master of disguises. He was so talented that he pretended to be a policeman and stuff. And then this is how he was able to steal. And then he was also like Stalin's close friend, worked with Stalin a lot. And then he was imprisoned, I think in Germany. I think he was caught somewhere else, maybe pulled to Germany. He played insane for many years in German prison. He fooled all the German doctors, and they signed off that he was crazy. And so they sent him back to Georgia because he was deemed, insane. And the Georgian, not Georgian authorities, but the authorities, the Russian imperial authorities were like, well, Germans never make any mistakes, so they never checked him. So they put him in like a much less like secure prison, which he escaped immediately.
Mm-hmm.
So he was this like incredible hero, like it really just there should be like a movie about him because he was just so.
Yeah, and a lot of, Kamo is a nickname, but it became a very common first name in Armenia during the Soviet times. And in fact, the city of Gavar today, during USSR times, it was named Kamo. So just FYI. But yeah, that's an interesting anecdote. And we hope Kamo, the cat, will like our podcast when she listens to it in the future. And thank you, Sopo, for joining us. We hope the best. We wish calm elections, and hopefully, what will happen is what's best for the people of Georgia.
Thank you for joining
and it's
us.
the will of the people of Georgia.
Thank you so much for giving this opportunity.
We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
That's our show today. This episode was recorded on October 23rd, 2024. We've been talking with Sopo Japaridze, who is the chair of Solidarity Network, an independent care workers union in Georgia. She has been a labor organizer for over a decade. She researches and studies labor and social relations and writes for various publications. She is a co-founder of the Reimagining Soviet Georgia podcast.